This week, we're answering the question, why is voting so inaccessible to people with disabilities? What if you've done everything you could to vote? You registered on time, you researched your candidates, you requested your ballot, and yet you still can't vote.
This time I had trouble voting because there was only one wheelchair accessible booth.
I have voted in places before where the accessible door was locked, where there were steps to the entrance, or where the accessible voting machines were broken.
It just makes you feel like you're an afterthought.
Welcome to the world of voting for many Americans living with disabilities, the largest minority bloc in America. 1 in 4 American adults live with a disability. And that doesn't even factor in the fact that 45% of Americans live with chronic illness. During a global pandemic, that means that a huge portion of the electorate have health conditions that impact their ability to vote safely.
In 2018, about 14.3 million people with disabilities reported voting.
That's Susan Mizner, the director of the ACLU's Disability Rights Program.
If everyone who was in the disability community voted at the same rate as the general population, we would have had an additional almost 2.5 million votes that would have been cast in 2018.
So when we talk about accessibility in voting, I think a lot of folks might just think, okay, there's the wheelchair ramp to the building, this is accessible, but it's so much more than that.
You're right that disability community is much broader than people with mobility disabilities. Folks with hearing disabilities, people who are culturally deaf, need information in American Sign Language. Obstacles for people who have chronic illnesses like myself. Going and standing in line for any length of time is a huge barrier to people who are mobile, but not, how do I put this? We cannot sustain effort over 2 hours if there's a 2-hour line at the polls.
But you can see the line comes out of the gym, wraps around the building, and then snakes all throughout this parking lot.
In 2016, the Government Accountability Office found that over 2/3 of the polling locations they surveyed across the nation were not physically accessible. And that survey didn't even fully reflect the inaccessibility issues with the equipment inside polling locations.
I would go in and I would say, no, I don't want you to help me mark my ballot. I want to use the accessible voting machine.
That's Curtis Chong, a longtime technologist who has fought for digital accessibility across the country. He's often had to deal with insufficient solutions as a blind voter.
Basically, they would give you a headset, plug it in, but if you needed any kind of help to use it, the poll workers themselves did not know what the buttons did. They didn't know how to make it go faster or slower, and I was pretty much left to my own devices. So you know what? I just gave up, and I just had somebody help me mark the ballot because that's the easiest thing, and that's a strategy that I used before that worked.
What do you kind of identify as the reason some of these barriers still exist?
They don't think about it. It doesn't come to the forefront of their mind unless the noise is made. Like if a group of people go to Congress like we do every year, and we say in February, we want something for the blind, they remember us then, but they don't think about us any other time because we're not there, and so we're not a problem anymore. And that's why it's not happening. There's a mountain to move, a huge mountain.
America's patchwork voting system poses a real challenge to ensuring accessibility for all. Whether or not your state is accessible often depends on having someone like Curtis fighting in your state. But that shouldn't be the case.
People with disabilities have joined African Americans, women, Native Americans in centuries of advocacy to be able to get to the polls. The historical landmarks are the 1965 Voting Rights Act, 1973 the 504 Rehab Act, 1984 was Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act, 1990 the ADA, 1993 was the National Voter Registration Act, and then in 2002 was the Help America Vote Act.
We have all this legislation on the books, and then we see the reports of polling places being inaccessible. Why this disconnect?
It's pretty infuriating, and I just think it hasn't made it to a lot of the states where disability rights advocacy hasn't been strong.
The gold standard, frankly, needs to be a federal one. It needs to be something that whatever state you live in practices the same procedures, the same technology, the same systems, so that we, the blind, can share information with each other about how to use stuff.
So clearly these are issues, and these are issues now. While Congress has passed legislation aimed at improving access to the vote, that legislation hasn't been enough.
One of the reasons that I'm so excited about the Accessible Voting Act, because it's trying to create a system in which this can't happen. It addresses this with both a carrot and a stick. The carrot is that it provides funding and resources and expertise to states to create accessible websites. The stick is it now allows the protection and advocacy centers to sue them if they're not in compliance.
Voting is, everybody says, right? Oh, it's fundamental to our democracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm saying, well, if it's really fundamental to our democracy, then let's put the oomph into it that it needs so that it's available and usable by everybody.
We're hopeful that the Accessible Voting Act is something we can pass in the future. It's important for all of us to vote for leaders who will make this a priority and to join this fight. Thank you so much for watching this episode of At the Polls. If you want to know more about getting young people to vote or how the courts relate to this election, check out our other episodes. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.